Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week, we bring you Alicia Staley, three-time cancer survivor and Vice President of Patient Engagement for Medidata Solutions. All right, the clock is about to tick to 9:01. Jennifer is in London this morning, so you have Mary Bartlett and myself with our guest Alicia Staley. Thanks to everybody that helped with this, and in particular, thank you to Pfizer for sponsoring the breakfast series. And Alicia, good morning. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Good morning. I'm really honored to be here.
And you're already the first person in the chat. Fantastic.
Multitasking.
So, yeah, tell me about it. We usually do that, but we are very happy for our guests to jump right in. So to get going, usually what we do is we start with a little bit of an origin story, and yours is fantastic. It's basically straight out of a Marvel movie. So why don't you give us a little bit of background and tell us how you got to where you are?
Sure. I guess I'll give you the elevator pitch on how I ended up here in this hot seat this morning. By way of introduction, my name is Alicia. I am a three-time cancer survivor, and it's been quite a journey, really, for me over the last 30 years of my survivorship experience. But I guess I'll start at the beginning. When I was 19 years old, I was a sophomore at Syracuse University studying aerospace engineering. I wanted to be an astronaut. I thought I was going to be the first, female space shuttle pilot. I was going to take the space shuttle to the moon. I had big plans. I was really fixated on space and engineering, and really had spent my entire childhood sort of preparing myself to become an astronaut, or very involved in the space program, I guess I should say. Unfortunately, in my sophomore year studying aerospace engineering, I became very sick, and it took me about 6 months to actually figure out what was going on. I was just having all sorts of colds, illnesses, couple really bad cases of pink eye, which is a virus in the eye. And after about 6 months of tests and workup, they found out that I actually had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And my eyes were becoming so infected because the nodes in my neck, you have a lot of lymphatic glands in your neck, were so full of cancer that my eyes weren't draining properly. And if it really wasn't for these sort of chronic recurring eye infections, I don't know how long I could have walked around with that and have them not realize what was going on. I was diagnosed as stage 2 of Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it basically took me the next three and a half years to go through treatment to eradicate all of the cancer. So I went through everything, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. They just basically threw everything at me over a 3.5 year period. And I found it to be very difficult. It was really my first, I was the first person in my family ever to really deal with a major illness like this. And it was a challenge. It was, if you can imagine, a time before the internet, before the ability to Zoom anywhere, anytime. I found the experience to be very isolating. There just was nobody at Syracuse University going through something similar. And it just was very hard to find other people my age that were dealing with an illness. And
I can imagine. I was just going to ask you about that, right? I mean, you say 3.5 years, but that's the second half. That's basically the second half of college, right? You're wandering around college trying to get things done, and really, I can imagine you only have room in life for a couple of things, and I imagine it started with chemotherapy and ended with exams, probably, and that was probably about it.
Yeah, and I like to say I consider myself the luckiest cancer patient, I guess, if you could say it that way, because I had an incredible support system. My family was extraordinarily supportive, and my college roommates really they all pitched in and helped out, and really helped allow for me to basically stay in school. We talked about dropping out. a number of times. And I just said, cancer had really sort of taken a hold of my life in such a big way that I didn't want to drop out of school. So I took probably the bare minimum credit load that I could take to basically stay enrolled in college and really slog my way through my classes and treatments. And it was sort of it takes a village kind of effort to get me through college and stay on track. And I like to say at the end of it, I graduated I was on the 5-year plan. I was on the 5-year plan because I was dealing with an illness, but the majority of my roommates and friends were on the 5-year plan because they were too busy, partying, enjoying all that Syracuse had to offer. So, hey, we made it through together, just very different experiences. But yeah, it was very isolating experience. And, even we tried to go to a support program the very first year that I was going through treatment. And it was tough because I walked into this, support program, and I was like the youngest person there by probably 40 years, I like walk in as a 19-year-old, and you've got people that are in their 50s and 60s talking about dealing with metastatic cancer. And it was so overwhelming. And I realized, wow, this isn't for me at this point in my life. I've got to find a different way to cope and manage, and really sort of built my own support system around my experience. So.
Well, in thinking about things now, I mean, we can fast forward. So how did you get into healthcare?
Great question. So in 2004 and again in 2008, I was actually diagnosed with cancer again, as a direct result of all of the radiation that I had for the Hodgkin's disease. So in the early 90s, they were still basically maxing you out on the amount of radiation you could have to get you through your treatment protocol. And I was being a young adult, I had a lot of head, neck, and chest radiation. I ended up developing mucinous carcinoma of the breast, which is a radiation sort of induced cancer. So I ended up having to go through breast cancer treatments in 2004 and in 2008. And if you look at where we were in the early 2000s compared to where we were in 1990s, it was like a world apart. I mean, you had the advent of the internet. You had the ability to go to a little search engine called Google and type in, mucinous carcinoma and get all sorts of scary results coming back at you. And I realized we were at a very different point in time. In healthcare, there were a lot of opportunities to make the patient experience better, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think, when I finally had graduated from Syracuse, obviously I didn't go on to become an aerospace engineer, but I stayed in information systems and software development. So I had been, as my career had been progressing, I was getting more and more into web technologies, building online applications, really sort of in that first wave of, I was in financial services, working for a company that was sort of the first wave in terms of tech adoption in financial services. Okay. And I think I would walk from my office in Boston over to the hospital for treatment and feel like I was walking to a different time and space. I would leave my desk at the office that was high tech, hyper connected. I'd walk into the hospital, I'm filling stuff out in paper. And, it just was such a disconnect. And I think I was really getting frustrated with my experience at the hospital, filling out the same forms over and over again. I think as an engineer, I was just so frustrated with the inefficiencies in the system. And I think I complained about it enough at the cancer center where they were treating me. And I've been a patient now there for over 30 years, so I'm allowed to say this, but I think I complained a lot, and they finally got to a point where the hospital, Tufts Medical Center in Boston, and I can say that with love, they finally put me on the Patient Family Advisory Council in 2008 and basically said, listen, okay, smarty pants, you think you're going to be able to fix it, go do it.
Right, come help.
And yeah, and that to me, I think was the watershed moment in where my career went from there. I got really involved in volunteering at the hospital, got really involved in helping the hospitals start to move toward patient portals. I mean, this was such a big, hot thing 10, 12 years ago, 14 years ago now. And it just, I guess I was at the right place at the right time for a lot of this innovation to get started, and just really gravitated toward it, and thought, you know what, I've got the personal experience. I now have the IT systems, information architecture background. I understand what needs to be done here. Let's look at it from the patient perspective. So I think you're starting to see some themes pull through here that have really stuck with me. And that's how I got started, really.
Was that all volunteer driven until when? When did that switch to professional?
Yeah, I think it was all volunteer driven for maybe the first couple of years. And then, I started more and more, I started connecting with other PFACs, or patient family advisory councils in Boston, and quickly realized that I had a very unique skill set, and had a number of people approach me about, you should try consulting, to, consult on the side. I still had my financial services career. I started just doing consulting on the side, where I'd pick up projects on, how do we improve the patient experience? We're rolling out a new patient portal, or we're trying to figure out how to put this form online. What would this look like from the patient perspective? So it really started out as almost like this little side career, if you want to call it a side hustle. I guess that's the cool term to use.
That's the lingo now. That's what the kids.
Yeah, is that the lingo? Yeah,
I think so. I'm not sure, but let's pretend like we know it is.
It started out as a little side hustle, and it took off from there. And I think it just word of mouth here, and obviously Boston is sort of the epicenter for a lot of amazing hospitals and innovation. Just word got out from there, and I quickly found that my side hustle was starting to overtake my actual financial services career. And I have to say, I had an amazing boss that while I was going through all this, that took me aside one day and just said, listen, there's something here. You got to go check out. He's like, I fully support you taking some time off, or stepping away from your role here and giving this a shot. And if it doesn't work out, you can always come back. And I think it was the first time somebody had really taken me aside and given me a confidence boost, if you will, or was seeing me from outside the healthcare industry, and said, you've got an incredible skill set that, this is your calling. He's like, as much as I want you to stay right here and keep, crushing it with our team, like, there's something here that you need to go check out. We're always going to be here for you. And that, I took his advice and, talked to my husband about it. And I decided I was going to just give it a shot. And I've never looked back. So I basically started consulting full-time for a number of years, and just got really involved in the startup scene here in the Boston area. Really started to focus in on the patient experience around clinical trials. I think, I had really gotten involved in social media. So people were really starting to find me and connect with me as a cancer survivor. And I think the number one question I kept getting into any of my social profiles was like, I recently diagnosed with cancer, or my cancer's back. I need to find a clinical trial. I don't know what to do.
Right.
And quickly realized that the clinical trial industry in particular, there was a lot of patient need, or a lot of questions in patient communities about how to make this better. How do I connect with people to find a clinical research opportunity? And, it gave me an opportunity to sort of reflect on my own experience. And I realized every single time I had been diagnosed with cancer, I had been presented with a clinical trial. And the very first time through, my parents, because I was so young, my parents were involved in reviewing the informed consent. And my parents couldn't make their way through the informed consent. They could not read the document and make sense of whether or not this was a good opportunity for me at that point in my treatment journey. And both my parents are dual master's degree people. And
right.
I guess I say that just out of like, my parents, it wasn't an issue of reading comprehension, or it was, we don't know how to assess the information that we're given as to whether or not this can be a good opportunity for our daughter. And I just remember thinking how frustrated my parents were, even as a kid, that interaction really stuck with me. 2004 and again in 2008, I had very similar reactions. Informed consent wasn't really clear. I couldn't decide. There was nobody there for me to talk through these, what I thought were pretty important decisions.
And the person that hands you the informed consent, they want you to sign the informed consent so they can get going, right? They're not there to really, this is probably not fair, but in a lot of ways, sometimes people aren't there to truly explain it to you and make sure you understand it and get your feelings. It's, you came here to do this thing. We've already decided that you can do this thing. If you sign this form, we can do this thing. So you could read it or you could not read it, and then we can get going. And that's not the way it should be.
No, and all those interactions really stuck with me, and I probably you probably wouldn't be surprised to find out that I actually enrolled in a medical device clinical trial in my third cancer go around, because when I read it, I felt like I could understand it. The way that they were talking about the device, they had, a couple of graphs, a couple of schematic diagrams of the device. I felt like, okay, they're sort of putting this in an engineer's term. I could understand it from an engineering perspective. And that's probably the only reason why I felt comfortable enough moving forward with the clinical trials. I felt like I could connect with what I was learning in the informed consent process. But it's every person that comes to clinical research really brings their own background, their own experience, and that's how they sort of filter through that information. And I realized that I hate to keep using the word inefficient, I'm not an efficiency engineer, but maybe I should be. It's so hard to be involved in a healthcare interaction when there's so many inefficiencies or inequities, if you will.
Right. How did the path from consulting turn into Medidata?
That's a great question. I had the opportunity to work with a startup company here in Boston called Cure Forward. They had been around for a number of years. I had been doing some consulting work with them, and an opportunity to really join them full time, or basically become a full-time employee for that company, presented itself after a number of years of consulting. And I really felt like, this is my calling. This is a company that is working to help cancer patients find clinical trials based on, a genomic match with their tumor profile. And I just thought, this is where I need to be. And, looking back on it now, I like to say that I think that company in particular was maybe 5 years ahead of the industry. They were just a little too soon, a little too forward thinking, I think, in the business model. And unfortunately, the company has since stopped operating. But it was really my first full scale experience, I guess, 100% in clinical research, and the idea of patient recruitment and patient engagement around the whole clinical trial ecosystem was so fascinating to me. I felt like, for the first time in my entire career, I felt like, this is where I need to be. And my work at Cure Forward led me to Medidata after being in the industry for a few years. I had the opportunity to connect with Anthony Costello, who oversees Patient Cloud at Medidata. And, we had a number of conversations where he just said, we're really getting serious around the concepts of patient centricity and patient engagement at Medidata. And what does that mean for our company? What does patient engagement mean for a company like Medidata? And he said, we've got an opportunity, if you want to come on board, let's figure it out. And I jumped at that opportunity to join the team, because it just, with everything at Medidata, everything that we're trying to do in the industry, I think for me, it was a perfect, Medidata obviously is a software organization. So for me, it was like the best of all of my experiences, coming to bear in one role. So it's software development, it's, figuring out application product maps and how do we move something forward, but at the same time, making sure we've got the patient voice sort of baked in to the process. Are we thinking about this from our true end user? And, I really feel like in the whole clinical trial ecosystem, the patient is always the true end user. They might not be the ones signing the checks for, the big software services contracts, but they're the ones using the tools in a clinical trial. And it's just really, if I've done anything in my time at Metadata, it's to get them to, it's to get my whole team thinking differently about who's really the end user. It's the patient, it's the person participating in clinical research. It's not the sponsors, it's not the sites. No offense to the sponsors and the sites, but the true end user is the patient. So I'm really trying to get Metadata and the industry to continually look at this differently and realize that we have to start thinking about this from a totally different perspective. We've made tremendous progress in this industry, but we can do so much more if we just start to look at it from a different perspective. And we can draw on some incredible work that's already been done in other industries. There's so many different models that we could look to, in financial services and consumer retail. They've sort of figured out what that user experience really looks like. And I think there's a lot that we can draw on. And I think, my role at Metadata is really all about making sure that we're looking at it differently and not forgetting the patient.
Yeah. So we have a question, but before we get to it, I wanted to ask this. Do you remember either at Cure Forward or Metadata, do you remember something early where you actually had the conviction to put your foot down and say, we need to do this? Like, this is the thing that we're doing. This is the thing that's not right. This is the thing that's off base. This is where we need to reset. And this is where we need to be. Because I think, you've kind of blazed this entire path where, you are making things better for the patient effectively. And anytime you clean up a big mess, it starts with kind of one thing that you actually put to bed. So do you remember any of those?
Yeah, I think, I think it was at Cure Forward. And I think when we were initially starting to talk about, how do we roll out this solution, they were adamant that it was just, they were going to basically like go down the Rolodex and call sponsors and say, hey, we've got this great, clinical trial matching service, you guys should put it on the front end of your thing. And I said, no, you can't do it from that. You have to put your foot down. I put my foot down and said, listen, you can't sell this as a one-off solution. You basically need to put this in the hands of patients, whether or not a sponsor is underwriting this solution. You have to, you need to put out a registry. You need to put out some sort of front end where a patient can come, put their information and allow the process to start from there, not the other way around. It can't be sponsor centric anymore. It can't be sponsor comes first. You have to shift the model and really start to put the patient square in front of this whole equation. And we made a significant shift where we decided to start building out a patient community. And within months of doing that, they started to see the value. It became our patient advocates, our patient, our ambassadors, if you will. Like, the whole concept of the patient opinion leader started to make sense to them when they started seeing, wow, patients are passing this link around on social media. There's something to the patient perspective here. I'm like, you guys, this is the manifestation of what we've been talking about for months. Is right. I hate to use the we build it, they will come kind of analogy, but that's sort of what happened. And that, and I realized from now on, when I see something or see a solution going in the wrong direction, or it's being built without taking a pause to say, what would a patient think about this? That was a watershed moment, I guess, for me in my career, that, speak up and say something when you think it's going off the rails and bring it back to the patient. And that's where we need to be.
Yeah. Well, that was perfect. Aside from stepping on my pop culture movie reference, I was really waiting for it. I was waiting for like that thing to step in there with the Field of Dreams.
It's all about being a
We
Field of
forgive you.
Dreams. So
Yeah, I know. We have a really good question from someone that says, I work in clinical research and patient recruitment, and engagement is very important to us. Any tips or resources that you would recommend for clinical sites? We are also interested in reaching out to more communities of color.
If I've had this conversation with a lot of people in the last few months, so if you've heard this answer, I'm just going to reinforce it, I guess. But sites and sponsors right now have an incredible opportunity to be community builders. And one of the things that we're really missing in healthcare right now is this concept of sort of the anchor institution, where we were talking before we got on Zoom. I grew up in a very small town in Western New York. And I, fondly remember growing up, in the community hospital was sort of the anchor of everything that went on in that small town. There, you had events around the holidays there, you had open houses there, you were never afraid of the hospital as a young child, because it just seemed to be such a welcoming part of the community. And I think in some ways, sites and sponsors have that opportunity today. Even with all the technology and the hyper connectedness that we have today, there's still that fundamental need for some sort of social connection. And if sites and sponsors could step forward and really begin to be the community anchors, and really be a beacon of light for the communities that they're trying to serve, I think it would go a long way. And, people are like, well, what does that mean? And I said, I had a really great conversation with a couple site representatives a few weeks ago. And I said, have you guys ever thought of doing an open house, or, be a clinical researcher for the day, or, meet a researcher, or, do something where you're inviting the community in to let them learn about who you are, and it's not just about sponsoring an event in the community, or we're going to throw $5,000 at the community walkathon or something like that. Let's find real ways to make connections with the community. Get out there and meet your neighbors. If you got a site, if you're opening up a new site and you're in an area where there's other small businesses, build your own little network of interactions in that area. And I think you'd be very surprised at how quickly the word gets out about where you are and what you're trying to do. And I hate to say it's common sense, because it's not as common as we would hope. No. But there's just some basic fundamental community building exercises that I think people can go through and learn how to, we need to get back to the old-fashioned networking and connections, and that technology and social media can't replace that.
Is that one of the areas where you've seen a lot of progress in the last 5 or 10 years or so? Maybe you can share some examples of where we're really getting better, and maybe social media is one of them or not, but where do you see we're getting better?
Well, I think there's a lot of organizations that are really making some tremendous strides. And the one, I'm going to call out one organization. I hope that that's okay. But there's a group called the Lazarus Cancer Foundation. I think they're doing amazing work. And I can put the link in the chat if you'd like. They've sort of taken this community builder approach, right? They've done a lot for building community health hubs. They're helping cancer patients find clinical trials. They're also helping cancer patients that find a clinical trial that might not be able to afford to actually travel to the clinical research site. So they do a lot with travel stipends and sort of the social services that would wrap around the clinical trial experience. I would love to see more organizations sort of step forward and adopt a model like that, because what they're doing is really going community by community and sort of opening up doors to community research for people that have historically been left behind. You know, they're building networks, they're building communities into neighborhoods and areas where clinical research just has never even really been talked about. Yeah. So it's a very slow and methodical way of building relationships. And I think if more people could learn about organizations like that, you know, I'm sure there's other organizations that are very similar in what they're doing, but this one in particular, you know, I met them. I met the founders back in my Cure Forward days, so many years ago, and I've watched them grow over the last 6 or 7 years, and just continue to. They're networking with hospitals, they're networking with research organizations, and just building a new sort of social fabric that has to be wrapped around the clinical trial ecosystem. And, you know, if we could take something like that and just continue to scale it, I think the clinical research industry would be so much more welcoming for so many more people. And I think that that's what it's about. You know, we talk a lot about diversity and what that means in the clinical trial ecosystem, and how we need to have better representation, not only for patients participating in research, but better representation for site staff and sponsor staff, and, you know, people that are supporting the clinical trial industry. And, you know, we're having these hard conversations right now on how we can make things better. And, you know, Lazarus to me is one of the organizations that is really doing an amazing job with it. And I might sound like a cheerleader for them, but I'm looking at it, when I look at them, you know, I saw them as a cancer survivor first and foremost. And I realized, you know, they're probably the #1 organization that when somebody reaches out to me personally and says, I need help, that they are the ones that I send people to all the time, because they understand what it takes to support a patient going through a clinical trial opportunity in ways that I don't think the rest of the industry really gets, because they've really taken the time to understand the relationships, the social services network that needs to be in place and that's often overlooked. But yeah, I mean, there's when you find an organization like Lazarus, I feel like I have to be a champion for them. I need to shine a light. I need to be a beacon that says, go check out this organization, because I don't think we do that enough. And it would be cool to just have a fireside chat where everybody has to come and talk about somebody else's organization and just say, who's your favorite, and see what you get. But I'm always in on Lazarus. So
we can do that. And it's funny, it's a question that we ask a lot, right? I think it's important to, I think it's important to basically, you know, when you ask someone, hey, who's really good, and you get their genuine opinion on that, I think that's valuable. And I think the exciting thing, especially within clinical trials, is a lot of the folks that we talk to that are kind of either pioneering something new, whether they're a startup, et cetera, most of them, or the really exciting ones anyway, have said, you know, we've looked at the patient equation here and it needs to get better. And we need to do it this way. We need to do it this way. And it's not, you know, there are some kind of, you know, bulk AI solution things, but there are very few of them are just, yes, we churn all the numbers in here and it spits out more on this end. You know, I remember a conversation where, you know, I was talking with someone literally about recruitment, and they said, well, you know, if you're trying to get, you know, if you're trying to get clinical trials done in an area where they don't have a lot of internet, an email campaign is not going to help you, right? If you're not actually out in the community, you know, doing these things and doing the work, you're not going to actually get real engagement with that community. And the bright side is, I think there's a lot of organizations now that are actually putting in the work. And I think there's sites too that want to put in the work to reach out to their community, sites that, you know, haven't classically been, you know, high volume clinical trial sites. I think everybody sees the advantage, or I hope everyone sees the advantage of kind of better engagement with their communities.
Yeah. Something you said just now sparked a thought. You know, one of the hardest things that I've had to sort of overcome, I guess, if you will, when working in this industry, was around the concept of patient recruitment. you know, in the classic marketing, you know, the classic recruitment funnel, right? Anytime I see the funnel on like a slide deck, no offense to any marketers out there, I want to fall out of my chair, because it's just, they're like, you're like trying to like fill the top of the funnel with as many people as possible, and out at the bottom. You
could just picture the patients being picked up with a large scoop and just dumped.
That's exactly what I see. I'm like, it's like we're throwing these poor people into a meat grinder and hoping they come out on the other side like ready to participate in a trial. And it's just, and I'm like, we have to come up with a better way. It's like we're throwing them into a rock tumbler and like, well, what comes out, maybe a gem will fall out, and maybe not, but there's something about it just so, if we could get away from thinking about it as a numbers game, or if we don't recruit 500 people by May 1st, we're 25% of our behind on our trial. And I'm like, do you guys realize, like, who the people that you're trying to recruit, and sometimes you're talking to teams that are recruiting for rare diseases or metastatic cancer clinical trials, and you're thinking like, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not considering when we're talking about what's the volume we need of patients to fall through the funnel to get 20 perfectly matched people for this trial. It's just like we need to get back to that sort of high touch interaction. We have to treat clinical research like a high end kind of consumer retail experience. It's where we need the white glove, we need that relationship aspect to pull through in a way that we don't see.
Well, it has to start from the top.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mary. I was going to say it really has to kind of start from the top down, because I think that kind of the funnel mentality comes from the fact that someone somewhere signed their name to something that said by X month we will have X patients recruited, and then that flows downhill, right? So if you're the person at the end of that chain, and you're the person that's going to get the pressure, you get the pressure on the number, right? You don't get the pressure. You very often don't get the pressure on what kind of experience of these patients had. You don't get the pressure on any of that. It's either it's 25, and if you're at 24, you didn't get to 25 yet, right? And that's the mentality in a lot of ways that I think needs to shift, right? Ideally, we now start to have more people who are thinking about that, but ultimately, one of the biggest challenges is squaring away the patient experience on one side with the quote unquote value of the trial being fully enrolled 1 month earlier or 1 month late, right? One is a binary financial outcome, and the other is really kind of the experience of, like you said, the person who's at the heart of this whole scenario.
And I think that this is what it's all about, is what's the balance? There has to be balance. If yes, absolutely, this is a business, and you cannot deny that aspect of this. But at the end of the day, we have to start looking at this with a much more empathetic lens, and there's absolutely no reason why we can't do that and still have still achieve business objectives and better margins, and throwing all your business buzzword lingo here, but there's absolutely no reason why we can't do this with a lighter touch, if you will, and a much more empathetic lens.
Yeah, returning to something that you said, we just came from our patient engagement summit, and we appreciate so much your participation in that. Patient advocacy groups can be a really great way for, people doing research to find larger groups of, their target audience, their target, demographic. Yep. So is there a way that you think groups can do better, or, patients working in patient advocates working in certain disease states, that there can be more synergies between sort of, biotech or the metadatas of the world and, these patient advocacy groups?
I think it starts with a fundamental declaration that you will never, if you're in this industry, you will never compete on patients, right? That like competition shouldn't be around on who can recruit more patients. That full stop, like just stop with the, we need to recruit more than our competitors and or our collaborators, right? And is there a way, if I was starting up a new pharmaceutical company in XYZ condition, the first thing I would do is I would call, tweet, TikTok message, whatever it is today. I would find all of the patient advocacy groups in my therapeutic area, and I would bring them all in and talk about building a coalition within our therapeutic area. And I know that this is big dreams right here, because you've got patient advocacy groups that are sort of competing with each other for fundraising dollars and things like that. And yeah, that's ultra competitive, but at the same point, there's no reason why you can't find common ground to be a collaborator. And we have to look at these things differently in terms of relationship building and the way that we're reaching out to patient advocacy groups. And if you're squarely in a therapeutic area and you're really not going to deviate from that, you need to know every single player that's in that space, and you need to be talking to them regularly and bring them on, bring them to your campus, teach them about what's in your pipeline, within reason. Obviously, I'm sure you can't share your whole playbook, but there's no reason why you can't talk about, directions of where you need to go or research directions that you're trying to check out without giving away too much. But there's got to be a way to build better relationships. And from a patient perspective, I've had the opportunity to visit a number of pharmaceutical companies over the years, just as a cancer survivor. And I think, I hope it's okay to say this, but Genentech, I worked with them a number of years ago on a patient experience effort, and they brought me out and I spent a week and I got to meet the researchers and got to sort of see the campus of the organization. And I did a similar project with Vertex probably a decade ago, where they invited me to their office here in Cambridge. I got to spend the day with them. I got to go through the lab. I got to see how they made, they were showing me how they press drugs. And it was an incredible experience for me as a patient to be able to walk through this lab and shake hands with the researchers and meet the team. And, when I got through with the tour, I looked at the host that had me there for the day, and I said, I want to blog about this. I want to write about this experience. And they said, well, we can't get that by legal. Like we can't have a patient like talking about how great it is to visit the company. And I said, well, then why'd you guys bring me in? Like, I said, well, we'll eventually get to that point. And I thought, I want to be an ambassador for your company. Like there's patients out there that really want to help. And that are hyper connected and that are networked into a number of different advocacy organizations. And if you really spend the time to sort of build the relationships with, I call them patient opinion leaders, if you build those kinds of relationships, I think you will be surprised at what you learn when you start really talking to and building connections with your patient communities, because there's a lot out there.
Sure. And there are, patient communities for everything these days. And I think that, speaks to when you were saying your first cancer diagnosis, they're not really being a community for you. There are communities for everything now, and they can be virtual, they can be in person. Those communities are really important. But I think that patients having a role in the innovation stage, and feeling like they're advocates for innovation too is really important. There are so many patient advocacy groups that say, we'd like a cure for, our disease state, our condition, but they don't realize that they should be advocates from the very beginning, right? That very beginning stage of innovation.
Yep, that's a great comment. And I think, if you look at, there's a number of different therapeutic areas where patients are sort of leading the innovation, if you will, the
Mhm.
diabetes space in particular. You've got a number of patient groups that have sort of stepped up and created, their own tracking and sort of closed loop insulin delivery systems. They've hacked a Raspberry Pi and have done all this amazing work where, they're not waiting anymore for industry to respond to their needs, and they're doing it on their own. Well,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that I'm not advocating for something like that. It's happening. So, if you're in a specific therapeutic area and you're not listening to what patients have been asking for years, patients are going to figure out how to do it on their own. So, if you're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, if you follow the hashtag "We're Not Waiting," you'll see patients talking about things that they've hacked on their own to address an issue that they're dealing with. And obviously that's sort of the extreme, but it happened. If we're not listening to the patient communities, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, left on the innovation floor, if you will, when you're not sort of tuned into what a patient really, really needs. And I think what we just went through with the pandemic, and still going through with the pandemic in some ways, is a real good sort of vignette on the whole rush to adopt decentralized clinical trials, right? People were like, oh, it's never going to take off to the scale that we need. And lo and behold, you sort of drop a pandemic on everybody's feet, and all of a sudden innovation, we can't keep pace with innovation in decentralized trials. But if we had been paying attention to the patient communities for the last decade, the concept of the hybrid clinical trial is something that they've been begging for. The technology has always been there. We just needed the quote unquote business case. And it just, if we're not paying attention to what our patients are saying, we're losing.
I remember all of the discussions early on in the pandemic. In fact, our first guest on this program was Craig Lipset, right? And early on, basically everyone figured out that well, we can't do clinical trials like the way that we used to do them, so we have to change. And one of my friends in clinical research basically said every single trial that I look at now is in crisis, right? Every single one. And it's never waste a good emergency, right? So hopefully, I think we've come a long way where we've actually learned a lot of things. But something that you said before, outside of decentralized trials, I think the other thing that maybe, and I hope this stays in the middle of people's minds, but one of the things I recognized really early on during the pandemic is the first thing that anybody would ask in a business meeting is, how are you doing? Right? I think we got a level of, everyone at least got a little bit more concerned with, how is the person on the end of this Zoom call doing? What are the other things that are going on? And it's something that I hope actually we retain, right? I hope we do keep that additional empathy notch, if you will, professional, personal, or whatever it is. So the question that I wanted to tee up was, you talk a lot about engaging on Twitter, and there's a challenge between what a company can do and speaking on behalf of a company and speaking on behalf of a patient or yourself as a patient. So how do you try to straddle that that dichotomy, right? You speak for metadata on in some instances, you speak as a patient on the other. Are there times where those two things clash, and how do you think about that? How do you deal with those things?
I think I have to have that. I have that conversation every day. That's a really good question. And I think it's something that initially in my career, I think I struggled with, where's my consultant hat? Where's my patient hat? Where's my Alicia hat? And I think it's all about authenticity. So I'm always going to speak as Alicia, I guess. And I can no longer separate my personal experiences from my professional experiences, because they're so intertwined. So I think this is probably one of the number one questions I get from other advocates that are trying to expand their consulting profiles, or trying to work more with industry is, you've got sort of a moral compass, I guess, if you will, that sort of guides all the interactions that you have. And, if you're pretty clear about where you want the industry to go and what you're trying to achieve, I think it makes it a little bit easier to be able to say, all right, this is Alicia on behalf of metadata, or this is Alicia on behalf of the 20,000 patients in her patient community that she's speaking for. But I do, there are things in the industry that I still feel like I'm constantly putting my foot down on. And, are we thinking enough about privacy and security? Are we thinking about patient data return? Are we thinking about things that, that might not necessarily make the best business sense for the industry, but, it's something that patients desperately need or want? I think I'm sort of the bridge between those two communities right now. And I think when I finally embrace that role is the bridge builder and the peacemaker between these two domains, if you will, that's the role that I've chosen to take. So yes, do I have to be mindful that I might be in conflict with something that a stated position with metadata? Yeah, if that ever comes up, I will address it. I guess I can say right now, I've been pretty fortunate that there hasn't been anything too glaring of a disconnect, or where I feel like I desperately need to take sides. So I think I've learned to embrace my peacemaker role, and try to find that common ground if there is anything that needs to be done. For newer advocates, I imagine that's probably that might be a harder road to toe initially in their careers. So I do a lot of coaching with other advocates and trying to get them to really figure out, what's your top 10 things that you're trying to achieve, from your role as a patient advocate, and can you find companies that sort of match up with those ideals? And there's a lot of great companies doing a lot of great work right now that I think it's becoming easier for patient advocates to find those companies that truly are starting to consider the patient perspective. So I think the more that industry embraces the patient perspective, the less true conflicts are going to be sort of baked into the work that we're doing. Hopefully that makes sense, but
I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. I mean, so you have a role that, metadata, you have the benefit where metadata touches a lot of, has a lot of different touch points into the patient, into clinical trials. But is there anything that is kind of outside of your orbit that you can't touch, you can't impact, you can't bring your voice to? Is there an area of the industry that your voice doesn't reach that you just wish people would do better at?
I would have to say it's the connectivity with all aspects of healthcare. So, from a patient perspective, it's very clear that if you've got sort of healthcare with your primary care team, in my case, you've got the additional layer of oncology or other kinds of specialties within your healthcare. And then clinical research is still sort of this, there still seems to be this invisible wall between all these different healthcare domains. And I really think the next area that, I've been vocal about it in the past, and I feel like I'm getting pulled back into it in some ways, is, can we truly make a connected, end-to-end view for the patient, that I don't have to think, oh, this is clinical research, I need to go log into this system. This is my primary care doctor, I need to go log into that system. And oh, my oncologist is over here in left field or something, we're all just in one. We treat healthcare as healthcare, and research is a component of healthcare, and cancer treatment is a component of healthcare, and you can sort of turn these things on and off as needed, but you never have to worry about whether or not they connect and give you the ultimate picture of who you are, how you're doing at this very moment in time. And that's where we need to get to. And I think that it's going to take advocacy organizations from all these different areas coming together and really starting to push for this, because I think, you know, I think about it in my personal experience. You know, I've got like 7 different portals with information all over the place. Like, if, you know, other than you know, asking me how you doing today, like, I don't think I could give you a true like data perspective of how Alicia is at this very moment in time. And there's no reason why we can't be able to do that. You know, it's almost like a, what's my live system status report, you know? I really think that the industry, like the whole life sciences industry, will get there someday. I really wish it was sooner than later. Right.
We've had far too many people tell us about, you know, the binder, right? They have the binder of all of the information, because nobody who's involved with the binder talks to each other. And unless they have the binder, that's it. None of the corners of the system can actually talk to each other. So,
and if you had given me maybe a 7 to 10 day heads up that you were going to put that question here or make that comment, I could have gone to my storage unit here in Boston and pulled out my binder. You know, in my 7 banker's boxes worth of medical records that I could drag along and show you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a rite of passage as a patient advocate. If you don't have your binder and your own like stack of X-rays and CT scan films like hanging around your house, like, are you really a patient advocate? Like, is that what we need to? Because I got them all. So, you know, just let me know what you need, and I can share them. So.
We can do a separate deep dive where we actually have people either go through their binders or anything with us. But you know, that the sad thing is it's a thing, right? It's a thing that everybody has. It's a problem that everybody has, and it's one that we've heard, you know, ad nauseum, where now you can just quote unquote refer to a binder. And people are like, oh, yes, that is the massive thing that I had to lug everywhere. And if I didn't have it, no one else in the healthcare system would know what was in it. Or, you know, we had a guest a few weeks ago who, you know, talked about all of her efforts with her daughter and her daughter's care. And I think one of the huge things is the amount of the care burden we put on patients themselves and their family is massive. Just absolutely massive. And you know, you said this before, where you actually had a good support system. And one of the things that we keep talking about is, how does the support system get better for the patients that aren't quite that lucky? Because not everybody is that lucky, right? Not everybody, you know, lives within driving distance of a major academic medical center. Not everybody lives, you know, not everybody has all of these resources. So, you know, that's one of the things that we think about. You know, how does that get better? You know, how do we make that part better?
Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, there's really nothing I can add to that. That's a perfect summary of where we need to be. Really is. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have 2 minutes left, and you know, I think on that note, you know, how do you see where do you see us going in the next kind of 5 or 10 years? Do you see any, you know, kind of dominoes that are going to fall here? Do you see any kind of big puzzle pieces that are going to get put into place? Like, what are the things that you would really like to see happen that you think are attainable in the short term that are going to make things better?
I think, you know, where we are with decentralized clinical trials, I think that's here to stay. The whole concept of the hybrid clinical trial experience, I think that's just continue evolve, and I think that's going to open up doors to more and more people so they can experience clinical research. I think we also have to really start thinking about, are we utilizing the data that's being collected in the context of healthcare and clinical research as effectively and as efficiently as possible? See there, I got to say efficiently one more time. You know, how much data is just not being analyzed at this point? Like, we're throwing off so much data. You know, can we do that? can we analyze data in a better way?
Yeah.
Because we're just leaving too much behind. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us. You sit at the center of so many exciting things. Medidata is a tremendous company, and I think your voice is such an important one for the industry and for patients, right? I think the more people that we have like you who do act as a bridge, I think the more patient-centric we're going to get. I think that things are going to get better. So thank you so much for joining us today. We've had folks ask, what's the best way to get in touch with you? I hope we can continue reaching out here. What's the best way to do it?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and always happy to connect, or you can tweet me. I'm all over Twitter. So Twitter or LinkedIn would be the easiest and fastest ways to connect with me. I'm happy to answer any questions. So
great.
Well, you got it. Thank you so much, Alicia. You guys have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
This was awesome. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.